So, I've got something super cool for you today on Behind the Billions. You know Starbucks, right? Well, we're diving into the story of the guy who pretty much transformed how Americans drink their coffee.
Oh my gosh, yes. Howard Schultz is absolutely fascinating. And I'm really excited to talk about him. He took Starbucks from just like a tiny coffee shop in Seattle with only 11 stores and turned it into this massive global brand with, get this, over 28,000 stores across 77 countries.
Wait, seriously? That's incredible. How does someone even do that?
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, he basically created this whole new coffee culture in America. And what's really interesting is that he started from pretty humble beginnings to become this, you know, incredibly successful business leader worth billions. And he actually served as CEO multiple times, from 1986 to 2000, then again from 2008 to 2017, and even came back briefly in 2022.
Sounds like we've got quite a story to unpack here. So, Emma, tell me about where Howard Schultz came from. I mean, before all the coffee empire stuff.
Oh, so this is really interesting, actually. So Howard was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1953, and he grew up in the Canarsie public housing projects. His dad was a truck driver, his mom was a receptionist, and they really, really struggled to make ends meet.
Must have been tough growing up in that environment, right?
Actually, it's kind of fascinating because while Schultz talks about growing up poor, some people who knew him back then remember things differently. Like one of his contemporaries actually called their development the country club of projects. But, what's really important is that this background really shaped his whole perspective on business and life.
Did he have any opportunities growing up?
Yes, he spent a lot of time at the Boys Club of New York, which was like this safe haven for him. And then, get this, he actually went to Northern Michigan University on a football scholarship. But here's where it gets interesting. He had to quit football because of an injury, but he stuck with school and graduated with a communications degree in 1975.
So what happened after college?
So right out of college in 1976, he landed this job as a Xerox salesman in New York. And you know what's fascinating? This totally basic sales job actually taught him so much about business and building relationships. Then, in 1979, this really interesting opportunity came up. He got recruited by this Swedish company called Hammerplast to be their general manager in the US.
And that's what led him to Starbucks?
Exactly. Like at Hammerplast, he was in charge of their coffee machine operations. And in 1981, he noticed this small coffee shop in Seattle was ordering an unusual number of plastic cone filters. That shop was Starbucks, and something about it just caught his attention. He just had to go check it out. And that visit, well, that basically changed everything.
So tell me, what happened when Howard actually joined Starbucks? Because it wasn't exactly the Starbucks we know today, right?
Oh my gosh, not even close. So in 1982, Howard joins as the director of retail operations and marketing. And the company was basically just this tiny operation selling coffee beans and equipment. But here's where it gets really interesting.
What changed?
So in 1983, Howard takes this trip to Milan, Italy, and it completely blows his mind. Like he sees these Italian espresso bars where people are gathering and connecting over coffee, and suddenly he has this incredible vision. He's seeing coffee as this social experience, not just a product.
And I'm guessing the original owners were totally on board with this idea?
Well, that's the thing. They actually weren't. When Howard came back all excited about bringing espresso bars to America, the owners, Jerry Baldwin and Gordon Bowker, they were like, hold up. They worried about the cost of the machines, and they didn't think Americans would even want fancy coffee drinks.
So what did he do?
So get this. He actually leaves Starbucks in 1985 to start his own coffee shop called Il Giornale. And you know what's crazy? He visited over 500 espresso bars in Milan to really understand the business, but when he tried to raise money, 217 out of 242 investors turned him down.
But he obviously didn't give up.
Not at all. He finally raises the money, opens Il Giornale, and then something amazing happens. In 1987, the original Starbucks owners decide to sell, and Howard manages to buy Starbucks for $3.8 million. That's when everything really takes off.
How did he transform it into what we know today?
Oh, wow. So this is where Howard really shows his vision. He starts expanding rapidly, and this is really important, he refuses to franchise. He wants every store to maintain the same quality and culture. Then in 1992, he takes the company public with this $271 million valuation, which lets them double their store count. And from there, they just kept growing and growing, going from this small Seattle chain to this global brand with thousands of stores worldwide.
So what made Howard such an effective leader? What was his approach to running Starbucks?
Oh, this is what makes Howard so fascinating. His whole leadership philosophy was really built around this idea that, you can't create customer loyalty without first creating employee loyalty. And he did something really revolutionary for the time.
What was that?
So in 1988, he made this absolutely groundbreaking decision to offer health insurance to all employees, including part-time workers. And this was completely unheard of in the food service industry at the time. He actually called his father, who'd never had health insurance at his job, and told him about this decision. And it was this really emotional moment for him.
That's pretty impressive for a company that was still relatively small at the time.
Exactly. And he didn't stop there. He introduced this thing called Beanstalk, which gave employees stock options. Like, he really wanted every single employee, even the baristas, to feel like they were partners in the business, not just workers.
How did that affect the company culture?
It completely transformed it. See, Howard had this really strong belief that if you treat people like family, if you really invest in them, they'll give that same care and attention back to the customers. And he was really, really focused on creating what he called the third place. Not home, not work, but this comfortable space in between.
Did his leadership style change over the years?
What's interesting is that he always maintained this really hands-on approach. Like, even when Starbucks became this massive global company, he was still really involved in the details. He would visit stores constantly, talk to baristas, and he was known for sending these really early morning emails with ideas and suggestions. Some people actually called him obsessive about the customer experience.
Sounds like he was pretty intense about maintaining standards.
Oh, absolutely. He was kind of famous for these big dramatic gestures too. Like in 2008, when he came back as CEO, he actually shut down every single US store for 3 hours to retrain baristas on making the perfect espresso. That's thousands of stores. And you know what? He took that hit to the bottom line because he believed that maintaining quality was more important than short-term profits.
So it wasn't all smooth sailing for Howard, though, right? I mean, weren't there some pretty big controversies during his time as CEO?
Oh my goodness, yes. And probably one of the biggest ones that really damaged his reputation, especially in Seattle, was the whole Supersonics situation. See, in 2001, he led this group that bought Seattle's NBA team, the Supersonics, for about $200 million.
What went wrong there?
So the thing is, Howard approached running the team like a business, right? Which really didn't sit well with fans and players. And then in 2006, he started demanding that the city either renovate the arena or build a new one, saying they needed about $200 million for this. And when he didn't get what he wanted, he actually sold the team to this group from Oklahoma City.
I'm guessing Seattle fans weren't too happy about that.
Oh, they were absolutely furious. Like, the team ended up moving to Oklahoma City and becoming the Thunder, and people in Seattle they felt completely betrayed. Howard actually later called it one of the biggest regrets of his professional life.
And there were some issues with unions too, weren't there?
Yes, and this is actually still a really contentious issue. Like, from the very beginning, Howard had this philosophy that, if he treated employees well enough, they wouldn't need unions. But in recent years, especially during his last stint as CEO in 2022, things got really, really heated.
What happened then?
So when unions started forming at different Starbucks locations, Howard took this really strong stance against them. He actually said the company was under assault from unionization and called it outside forces. And there were all these allegations about the company retaliating against workers who were trying to organize, like firing them or cutting their hours. It got so serious that he even had to testify before the Senate about it.
How did he handle that testimony?
Well, let's just say it was pretty tense. He kept repeating this line about how he wasn't a union buster, and this is really significant, he actually refused to follow an NLRB judge's ruling about reinstating fired workers. It's kind of become this really complicated part of his legacy,
So, after all this business success and controversy, I heard Howard actually considered getting into politics.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And this is actually one of the most fascinating parts of his story because, Howard had been kind of dancing around the idea of running for president for years. Like, starting way back in 2012, there was all this speculation about him possibly running.
Did he actually go through with it at any point?
Well, the thing is, he really came close in 2019. He actually announced on 60 Minutes that he was exploring running as an independent candidate, and he was ready to put some serious money behind it too. Like, we're talking about potentially spending $300 to $500 million of his own money on the campaign.
What kind of policies was he supporting?
So Howard positioned himself as this sort of centrist, right? He's socially liberal, but fiscally moderate. Like, he supports things like same-sex marriage and gun control, but he's really concerned about the national debt and government spending. And, he's a big believer in free trade and comprehensive tax reform.
How did people react to the idea of him running?
Oh my goodness, the reaction was pretty intense, especially from Democrats. They were absolutely terrified that he would split the vote and help reelect Trump. And Howard kept saying, like, nobody wants to see Donald Trump removed from office more than me, but people were still really worried about it.
So what happened in the end?
Well, here's the interesting part. By September 2019, he officially decided not to run. He basically said it wasn't the best way to serve the country at that time. And when Joe Biden emerged as the Democratic nominee, Howard actually ended up endorsing him, saying people needed to vote for Biden for the future of our republic. So it's like, he kind of came full circle,
So, looking back at everything Howard's done, What would you say is his biggest legacy?
Oh my goodness, his impact has been just absolutely massive, right? Like, first and foremost, he literally transformed how Americans think about coffee. I mean, before Starbucks became what it is today, most people were just drinking basic drip coffee at home or at diners.
That's true. I've heard people call it the second wave of coffee culture.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that Howard didn't just create a coffee chain. He created this whole experience, right? Like, he introduced Americans to things like lattes and cappuccinos. But more than that, he created this concept of the coffee shop as this third place between home and work.
What about his impact on business practices?
Oh, that's another huge part of his legacy. You know, Howard was really ahead of his time when it came to employee benefits. Like, Starbucks was the first major company to offer health insurance to part-time workers, which was just completely unheard of at the time. And then there's the college achievement program that lets employees get their degree through Arizona State University.
Seems like he really tried to balance profits with social responsibility.
Yes, exactly that. And you know what's really interesting is how he pushed this idea that companies should have a purpose beyond just making money. Like, he was really big on fair trade coffee, environmental sustainability, and creating these ethical sourcing guidelines that actually influence the whole industry.
What about his leadership style? What kind of mark did that leave?
Oh, his leadership approach has become like this case study in business schools. You know, the way he combines this really ambitious vision with this focus on company culture and values. And the thing that really stands out is how he always emphasized this emotional connection with both employees and customers. It's like he showed that being profitable and being socially conscious aren't mutually exclusive. They can actually work together to create something really powerful.
I think that summarizes best what's so unique about Howard Schultz. Thank you for another great time, Anna.
Thank you, Liam.